Welcome to your custom deep dive. Today, we're going on a journey through time to explore how ancient history and religious beliefs, still influence our world today.
Fascinating stuff, right?
Oh, yeah. We've got a really cool mix of sources for this one. YouTube videos that actually question if figures like Jesus and Abraham really existed, a deep dive into Egyptian religion, and get this, even some connections between the Book of Genesis and ancient Mesopotamian myths.
Yeah, those myths, they're more influential than people think.
For sure. And of course, we'll be checking out some Wikipedia too to get a glimpse into daily life in ancient Egypt and even touch on some experimental archaeology. Ready to unearth some knowledge gems.
Let's go.
Okay, so jumping right in, it's so interesting how we still debate the historical existence of these figures, like Jesus, Moses,
Oh,
Abraham.
absolutely. Some of the YouTube videos you shared really dig into this.
Yeah, like what evidence do they use to kind of back up that claim?
Well, one of the speakers, um, he really focuses on the lack of physical evidence, like the whole show me the bodies argument.
Right.
On the surface, it does make you think, right?
Yeah, yeah. You'd think there'd be something tangible.
But then, at the same time, they acknowledge that 99% of bodies from that era are just gone, lost.
So, I mean, it's not that surprising, right?
Not at all.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it. The vast majority of physical evidence from back then just didn't survive.
Makes sense.
But there's another layer to this, especially with Jesus.
Okay.
Historians talk about external evidence.
What does that even mean?
So it means accounts from non-Christian sources, basically backing up that Jesus and early Christians existed.
Oh, like from who, though?
Think Roman historians, guys like Josephus, Tacitus, Pliny the Elder.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Writing from their Roman perspective, they documented early Christians, their beliefs, and of course, Jesus, their leader.
It's kind of wild to think that we might actually have more evidence for Jesus than for others from that time.
It really shows how much impact and how quickly early Christianity spread within the Roman Empire.
Wow.
Now, one of the videos you shared, it brought up something really interesting. It asks, could Christian baptism rituals be connected to ancient Egyptian practices?
Oh, yeah. That one definitely piqued my interest. But they were pretty cautious about jumping to conclusions, too, right?
Oh, for sure. They stressed the need for research before making any connections.
A good point.
Like, for example, think about the mikveh in Judaism, the ritual bath. And what about the community at Qumran, where they found the Dead Sea Scrolls? Both involved ritual cleansing with water, and they could have easily influenced how Christian baptism developed.
It is interesting how water has always played a role in spirituality, right? Across so many cultures and different time periods.
It's true. It's a symbol that everyone gets, like purification, renewal, transformation, a shared human experience.
Totally. Okay, so let's switch gears a bit. Let's talk about Abraham's journey to Egypt during that famine. We're looking at Matthew Henry's commentary on Genesis for this, right? What's so special about this story?
Well, Henry brings up this question. Abraham's choice to leave Canaan, God didn't tell him to do it. So should his faith have kept him put? It makes you think about faith, obedience, and really understanding God's will.
That's a question for all time, isn't it? Figuring out how to live faithfully, especially when things get rough.
And, Henry doesn't stop there. He says that even when you have good intentions, if you step outside God's will, there can be unexpected consequences. And Abraham's trip to Egypt, let's just say it got complicated.
Okay, so enough of that heaviness. Let's move on to ancient Egypt. Not just the pharaohs and the pyramids, but like the everyday lives of Egyptians.
Love it. That Wikipedia entry really brings them to life.
Oh, yeah. I was amazed by their legal system. It felt so modern, They really emphasized resolving conflict peacefully and valued honesty.
Super advanced for the time. And a lot of it had to do with their environment.
In what way?
The Nile. Yeah, those annual floods, they were unpredictable, but they led to amazing agricultural techniques. They really understood nature's cycles, and that helped them develop their culture and create such a complex society.
So it's more than the pyramids, right? It's about how these everyday Egyptians were so smart and adaptable.
Totally. Picture this. Mud brick homes built to stay cool. Looms weaving linen. A busy marketplace full of goods and ideas. But did you know? Ceramics were a big deal for them. Storage jars, fancy pottery for ceremonies. They were just like us, living, working, creating this amazing society.
It's like you said, it really humanizes them.
Right.
Okay, so getting back to human experiences, there's another connection we need to explore. It's about ancient Mesopotamian mythology and the creation story in Genesis.
Ah, yes. One of those videos really got into this, finding some cool parallels between these two cultures.
Okay, get ready for this. They both have flood narratives, NED, these ancestral beings who shaped the world. And you know what's even crazier? You see the same stuff in Aboriginal Australian mythology.
Yeah, it is pretty mind-blowing. These stories travel across time and continents.
So does that mean it was all one event? Or are these like universal stories that everyone tells? Stories about creation, destruction, the cycles of life, echoing across cultures.
You've got it. It makes you look at these ancient stories in a whole new light.
It really
They're
does.
not just isolated tales. They're connected, part of a bigger human story.
Totally. But hey, we've got more to unearth, so stay tuned for part 2 of your ancient history deep dive.
Can't wait.
Welcome back to your deep dive into ancient history. We uncovered some pretty amazing connections, right?
Oh, for sure.
I feel like we've only just scratched the surface, ready to go deeper.
Absolutely. There's so much more to explore.
Yeah.
Remember when we were talking about Abraham's journey to Egypt?
Uh-huh.
Well, Matthew Henry's commentary on that, really got me thinking about faith. Like, what does it really mean to trust in God's guidance?
Yeah, that whole idea of testing faith really stuck with me.
Right. And Henry, he makes this point about stepping outside of God's will, even if you mean well. It can have like a domino effect, lead to consequences you never saw coming.
And with Abraham going to Egypt, things definitely got pretty messy.
Totally. It's easy to focus on what Abraham did, but think about Sarah.
Oh yeah, what about her?
When they got to Egypt, Abraham got scared. He told Sarah to say she was his sister, not his wife.
Why did he do that?
He was worried, that the Egyptians would want her and, kill him to get to her.
So he was trying to protect himself, but putting her at risk.
Exactly. And it worked, at least for a while. Pharaoh saw Sarah, thought she was beautiful, and wanted to marry her.
But then God intervened, right?
Yep. The Bible says God sent plagues to Pharaoh and everyone in his house. Abraham tried to protect himself, but it ended up backfiring. God's judgment fell on people who had no idea what was really going on.
Wow, that's intense. It makes you think twice about the choices we make, even with good intentions.
No doubt. It shows how connected everything is. Our choices have consequences for others, too, whether we mean them to or not.
Okay, that was a lot. Can we talk about something a bit lighter now? I'm super curious about experimental archaeology. It sounds like such a cool way to connect with the past.
Oh, it is. So basically, these archaeologists, they're trying to recreate stuff from ancient times. Like they might build a building using only the tools and techniques people had back then. Or they might even recreate a voyage using a replica of an ancient ship.
Wow, like trying to build a pyramid the way the Egyptians did.
Exactly. Or imagine sailing across the ocean in a Viking longship. It helps them test theories about how things were built, how people navigated, all sorts of stuff.
I read that they even built replicas of those ancient Austronesian boats from the Wikipedia entry on ancient Egypt. What can we learn from projects like that?
So much. We learn about their seafaring skills, their navigation methods, and it also shows us how sea travel helps spread culture and ideas. It's not just about building a boat, it's about experiencing what those ancient sailors went through.
It sounds amazing. It must be incredible to connect with history in such a hands-on way. Going back to that debate about the historical figures, one thing that struck me was how the lack of physical evidence doesn't necessarily mean they didn't exist.
Right. And the speaker in that YouTube video, they made a good point. Even for famous figures like King David or Solomon, we don't have bodies. It shows you can't just rely on physical stuff, especially from so long ago.
So no body doesn't automatically mean no person.
Exactly. Historians look at everything, records, cultural impact, multiple sources. It's like solving a puzzle. You need all the pieces, not just one.
It's like a historical detective story.
Love that. Okay, let's get back to those possible connections between Egyptian practices and Christian baptism. What do you think?
I've always been fascinated by that. It's like, what are the specific things that link them?
Well, both traditions use water in a really symbolic way. For purification and rebirth, ancient Egyptians had these elaborate rituals with immersion in sacred waters. And then you have Christian baptism, where you're either submerged or sprinkled with water.
It's like this common thread. Water as a way to become clean and start fresh. Do scholars think there's a real connection there?
Well, it's tricky. Some see a direct link, others say the similarities are just on the surface. It's another historical puzzle where the evidence can be interpreted in different ways.
That makes sense. So, what else do you have up your sleeve? What other pieces of this ancient puzzle are you ready to reveal?
Okay, how about this? What is ancient Egyptian beliefs about the afterlife influenced early Christian views. Get ready, because this is where things get really interesting.
Welcome back to the deep dive. It's been an amazing journey, right? Exploring ancient history and how it's woven into our beliefs today.
It really shows how these ancient stories and beliefs, they still matter. People are still debating them, trying to figure them out. We've seen how differently people interpret the evidence, especially when you're talking about how religious practices began and how they changed.
Yeah, for sure. Like that whole discussion about baptism, did it come from Egyptian rituals? It's amazing how water has always had such a deep meaning for people across so many cultures and throughout history.
Absolutely. That idea of water purifying you, giving you a fresh start, it's a really powerful concept, and it just keeps popping up throughout human history.
It makes you wonder if maybe these shared themes across different cultures, are they pointing to something deeper, like universal truths that we're all trying to understand, whether we realize it or not?
That's a really interesting thought. Maybe it's all about those big questions we ask ourselves.
Yeah.
What's our purpose? Why are we here? What's the bigger picture? It could be that we're all searching for the same answers, even if we express it in different ways.
You've definitely given me a lot to think about. I know one thing that really stuck with me was the discussion about Abraham and his trip to Egypt. Like, even when you have good intentions, things can go wrong, especially if you stray from, what you believe to be God's plan.
It's true. Even the heroes of faith, they mess up sometimes. They're human.
Yeah.
And their choices, just like ours, have consequences, a ripple effect.
Yeah, it's a reminder that we're all connected. What we do affects other people, whether we mean it to or not.
Absolutely. It's a call to be humble in our decisions, to think about the impact not just on ourselves, but on everyone around us. Okay, on a lighter note, can we talk more about daily life in ancient Egypt? That Wikipedia entry was fascinating.
I know, right? I was blown away by how advanced their legal system was. They were all about peace and honesty, which feels so relevant to us today.
And think about the Nile River. It shaped their whole culture, their entire way of life.
Oh, definitely. It was a challenge with the unpredictable flooding, but they also figured out how to make it work for them. Those agricultural techniques they developed, amazing.
They were so resourceful and innovative, adapting to their environment and finding ways not just to survive, but to thrive.
It shows how everything's connected, doesn't it? The land, the culture, technology, it all influences each other.
Definitely. And, these ancient civilizations, they weren't just isolated. They interacted with each other, with the environment, with the events happening around them, just like we do today.
Right, okay, gotta talk about this. Those parallels between the Mesopotamian myths and the biblical creation story. Mind-blowing. It makes you wonder about the origins of those stories, how they traveled and changed over time.
The Epic of Gilgamesh, that's a big one. It has that flood story, themes of creation, facing death. It definitely influenced so many other stories, even the Bible.
It really makes you think about how cultures share ideas, how stories evolve, and how they get passed down.
And if you take a step back and look at it all, it shows that we humans, even if we're separated by time and distance, we're more connected than we might think.
It's like we're all searching for the same things, trying to understand our place in the world, trying to make sense of it all. These shared stories, they point to that common human experience.
Exactly. And it's a good reminder that our stories, our beliefs, even our rituals, they're all rooted in the past. We're shaped by those who came before us.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into ancient history, what's the biggest takeaway? What can we learn from these civilizations and their beliefs?
I think it's this. The past isn't really gone. It's still with us. You can see it in our beliefs, our rituals, even how we understand ourselves. Those ancient debates about who really existed, where our traditions come from, what it all means, we're still having those conversations today.
And the exploration never ends. There's always more to learn, new connections to discover, different perspectives to consider.
What stood out to you the most from all this? What are you curious to explore further?
I'm really fascinated by daily life in ancient Egypt. I want to learn more about their art, their music, their social customs, and those connections between ancient myths and modern storytelling. That really blew my mind. I feel like I need to revisit some of the stories I grew up with and see them in a whole new light.
That's fantastic. I encourage you to follow those interests. We've only just scratched the surface. Who knows what amazing discoveries are waiting out there for you. Keep exploring.